Hi, and welcome back to English Lessons with Stephanie. This is Grammar Lesson 10, Asking Questions. Let's start with what you already know. Look at these questions and see if they look correct to you, and then we'll come back to them at the end of the lesson. In Lesson 9, we talked about the three primary helping verbs be, do, and have, and these are used at the beginning of yes-no questions. So, for example, is this your car, or was the test difficult, or are they at the shop? These are all questions that you could answer with a yes or a no. In the second column over here, we have other helping verbs that can also be used for yes or no questions. We haven't talked about these helping verbs yet, but you would use them in the same way at the beginning of a question. When we make questions with helping verbs, the helping verb comes first, followed by the subject, and then, if necessary, the other verb. In this first example, is, the be verb, is the main verb, so we don't need to use another verb. This is different from a regular statement, or the answer, which would be, no, that man is my neighbor. In these answers, the subject comes before the verb. In our third example, though, is Carlo arriving at noon, we use another verb because this is the present progressive tense. So is, the helping verb, goes before Carlo, the subject, and then arriving, the other verb form. In the statement, the answer form, no, Carlo is arriving at 3, we see the regular form, where the subject comes before both verb forms. So let's practice. Look at the answers to these yes-no questions and, using the helping verbs, create the questions that would go before these answers. So for example, the answer to the first question is yes, I am a student. So the question would be, are you a student? Am is the be verb, and I is the subject, but you can't ask a question to yourself, so you change it to you, and then you uses the verb are. You have to put that in the front, and then there is no other verb form. So let's practice. Pause the video and see if you can create the correct form for the yes-no questions using helping verbs. And then, when you're finished, unpause the video to see the answers. Here are the answers to the questions. For some of these, you might have a slightly different question. Okay, now let's talk about do. As you may remember from Grammar Lesson 9, do is used to make negative forms of statements that don't have other helping verbs. The same is true when making questions. If a question doesn't have another helping verb, we use do in the beginning. So in our first example, the answer is yes, that man teaches at my school. There are no helping verbs in the sentence, just the main verb teaches. So we would put a form of do at the beginning of the question. Does here to go with that man, and then we would make teach into the general verb form to make does that man teach at your school. Similarly, there is no helping verb in the second statement, so we would put does again in the beginning of the question. In our third example, we use the past tense because arrived is the past tense, so we would put did in the beginning of the sentence. In the last two examples, we have the negative forms as answers, but that doesn't change the question. So we can still look at the main verb and add do. So let's practice. See if you can create the correct questions that would give us these yes-no answers using do. Remember that you will have to change the verb into its general form and add do at the beginning of the question. When you're finished, unpause the video to see the answers. So here are some of the answers that you could have come up with. So that's how you ask yes or no questions using helping verbs. Now let's look at ways to ask other questions using question words. Our main question words are often called the 5 W's: who, what, when, where, and why. These are the main question words. At the end, we also have which and how, which can be used with other kinds of words. These words are used to ask questions where we cannot answer with a simple yes or no. For example, when we're asking about a person, a time, a place, or a reason. When we use question words to make questions, they go in the beginning of the sentence, just like with our helping verbs. So the format is question word, then the verb, and then the subject. In our first example, we can see how we would use the question word who to answer the statement, that man is my uncle. In the answer, that man is the subject and is the verb, and my uncle is a person, so we would want to say who. So this becomes who, the question word, is, which is the verb, and the subject, which is that man. Who is a little complicated because sometimes who can be the subject of the question. In the second statement, my uncle lives here, my uncle is the subject of the statement, but also the question that we're trying to answer. So when we make the question, who lives here, we use lives, the verb, and not does, who does live here, because does is no longer needed as a question word. Does would have to go in the beginning of the sentence before the subject, but here, who is the question word and not does. So we just say who lives here. In our other examples, we can see when we would use what, when, where, and why. So let's practice. Pause the video and try to make questions using these question words. When you're finished, unpause the video to see the answers. So here are some of the answers that you could have made. Next, we'll talk about how to make questions using which and what. Which and what can be question words by themselves, or you can put nouns after them. Now, which and what are very similar question words. We can use which and what if we're asking someone to choose between several options, several choices. In formal English, we would use which to choose between a set number of options and what to choose between infinite options. For example, we don't say which is your favorite color, we say what is your favorite color, because there are so many colors, or what is your favorite food. There are infinite kinds of food. However, in informal English, many people use what instead of which, even if you're choosing between just two things. So you can see in these examples, after which or what, we put a noun, which house, which book, which person. And the rest of the question format is the same. We use the helping verb or the question word, and then the subject, and then another verb form if needed. So let's practice. You can make questions here using which or what, followed by a noun. When you're finished, unpause the video to see the answers. So here are the questions that you could have written. Just like which or what, the question word how can be used with other words behind it. How can use verbs, adjectives, adverbs, and the words many or much. In our first example, we see how just as a regular question word, like how are you, or how did you like it. Down below, we can see how used with adjectives, like how old are you, how tall is he, or how long is the movie. In the next column, we can see how many and how much. How many is used with countable nouns. If you don't remember what countable nouns are, please review Grammar Lesson 5. How many sisters do you have, or how many classes are you taking? And lastly, we can see how much. How much is used with non-count nouns. And again, you can review non-count nouns in Grammar Lesson 5. How much money does this cost, or how much time will this take? So let's practice. Let's try to make questions using how. So again, you're going to look at the answers and see what questions we need to ask. In the first example, we say the test was very hard. So this question would become, how hard was the test? Or if the answer is there are 50 states, the question could be, how many states are there? So when you're finished making your questions, unpause the video to see the answers. Here are the answers you could have written. Let's return to the questions that we asked in the beginning to see what you've learned and what you already knew. So what's wrong with these sentences? Pedro is here. Should be, is Pedro here? Because we need to start a question with our helping verb. And our second question, are you speak English? We've started the question with the wrong helping verb. We should say, do you speak English? The be verb, are, should only be used with other verb forms or alone. In our third question, when this class finishes, this question is missing a helping verb after when. The correct question form would be, when does this class finish? Similarly, with the next question, what your name is, we need a helping verb after what. This helping verb is in this question, but it's just in the wrong place. To fix this, we would just move is after what. What is your name? Our fifth question, are you going or not? Sometimes we add or not at the end of a yes or no question. And our last question, I want to know what time is it? This is not a correct question format because it begins with a subject and not a question word. Maybe this is something you could say in spoken English, but you would not want to write it. So to review, questions put the verb before the subject. Yes-no questions begin with helping verbs. General question words are who, what, when, where, and why. And other question words or phrases use which and how. So that's it for today. We've talked about a lot of things, so it's important to keep practicing. Get the Class 10 grammar worksheet from the website so you can do more exercises and make sure you remember what you know. If you're enjoying my free classes, please remember to like, comment, and subscribe to the YouTube channel. Thanks, and hope to see you for listening lesson 10.